Okay, this is the Algebra 1A, section 1.6 video lesson for multiplying and dividing real numbers. Okay, so this is really not too bad. Really just if you're multiplying a negative number with a positive number, you get a negative number. So 12 times negative 8 is negative 96. 22 positive numbers is going to give you a 20 positive number. 24 times 0.5, which is a half, which is half of 24, is 12, positive 12. When you multiply fractions, remember you multiply the tops across and the bottoms across. Since one of them is negative, the answer, just always take the negative on the top, right? Because just a side note, people always ask, this negative 3 over 4 is the same as just negative 3 over 4, like it's a negative fraction, which is the same as 3 over negative 4. If you just always treat it like this one, it will make your life easier. So both these two are equivalent, but just keep it like that. This way, the top here is negative 3 times 1 divided by or over 4 times 2. And then you'll see the top is negative 3, the bottom is 8. So it's negative 3 over 8, right? Which is equivalent to negative 3 over 8 or, positive 3 over negative 8, but you don't need these. Just leave it like this. Okay, and then when you square something, remember you're taking that thing and multiplying it by itself twice. So these are two negative numbers. That becomes positive, and 3 times 3 is 9. So be careful whenever you square a negative number, it becomes positive because you're multiplying two negatives. So this answer is 9. Okay, so try these 4 on your own. Press pause and then check back for your solution. Okay, so this first one, negative times a positive is a negative, negative 90. Two positives is a positive, 2.4. Negative and a positive is a negative, and then two negatives is a positive, so negative squared. Negative 4 squared is just positive 16. So be careful with that. And also, side note, this is different from negative 4 squared, because remember, this is the same as negative 1 times 4 squared, and remember, exponents come first. So this would be negative 1 times 4 squared is 16, which would be negative 16. So be really careful between those two. If the negative is in the parentheses, that means it's being squared. If it's not, then the negative's not being squared, just the 4. Okay, and you get lots of practice with that in this course. Okay, simplifying square root expressions. Okay, moving on to square root. So if you noticed up here, let's look at this one here. Negative 4 squared is positive 16, and so is 4 squared. They're both equal 16. So, right, so negative 4 squared equals 16, and 4 squared equals 16. That means if you're going backwards, taking the square root, right, the square root of 16 is not just 4, it's also negative 4. So it would be positive and negative 4, and that's how we write that, right? Because you can multiply negative 4 by itself twice and get 16 too. So that's how you so that's how you deal with taking square roots. So in order to talk about a negative square root, you would put a negative in front of it. So this would simplify to negative, the square root of 25 is 5. So that would just simplify to negative 5 with the negative in front of it. And then this plus or minus would stay in front, and this would be the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 49 is 7. So it would be plus or minus 2 over 7. All right, and here are some to try on your own. Press pause and check back for the solution. Okay, and so 8 plus or minus 4, negative 11 plus or minus 1/6. Not too bad, you're just taking square roots. And don't get confused with squares. Okay, so we kind of talked about this before with our fractions, but dividing real numbers is going to be the same thing. If you divide two numbers and one of them is negative, then your answer is negative. If you divide two numbers that are both positive, your answer is positive. If you divide two things by two negative numbers, then it becomes a positive. So it's the opposite of multiplying. So this here would be negative 4. This one here would also be negative 4, right? A positive divided by a negative. Just like I talked about, the negative being on the top and the bottom doesn't really matter. The answer is still the same. Here we have two positives being divided, so this just becomes positive 4. And here we have two negatives. The negatives cancel, so that is actually also positive 4. And then be careful when you're dividing real numbers. If you have 0 divided by any real number, that answer is going to be 0. Right? If you have no pizza slices and you have 8 people, you still each get no pizza. Right? But if you have 8 pizza slices and 0 people, how much does each person get? Well, you can't really answer that question, right? You can't divide by 0. So this would be NA, or null set, or no solution. You'll probably see more often. You cannot divide by 0. So be careful. The 0's on top, the answer is 0. 0's on the bottom, it's no solution. Okay, so let's look at this word problem for dividing real numbers. A skydiver's elevation changes by negative 3,600 feet in 4 minutes after the parachute opens. What is the average change in the skydiver's elevation each minute? So if we wanted to know how much the average change is, we would take our negative 3,600 and divide it by 4. So our answer is going to be negative, and 36 divided by 4 is 9, and we have those 2 zeros, so this is going to be negative 900. And this was feet, and this was minute, so our answer is feet per minute. So the average change in the skydiver's elevation each minute is negative 900 feet per minute. Okay, negative divided by positive is a negative. Okay, and here is one for you to do on your own. Press pause and check back for the solution. Once you've tried it, press pause. Okay, and this question is just asking what's 360 divided by 5? I mean, it's $72. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce you to the inverse property of multiplication. Basically, how do you undo multiplication, which is basically dividing. The opposite of multiplication is dividing, but you also can multiply it by a number. So, and that's, in essence, you're dividing, but it's called multiplicative inverse. It's going to be the reciprocal of your number. So for every non-zero number, A, there's a multiplicative inverse, which means you can multiply by a number to undo it to get 1. And so it's basically the reciprocal. So if A was a number and it had a, remember we can make it a fraction by dividing by 1. Its reciprocal is if you just flip those and make it 1 over A. And that is the multiplicative inverse. And then when you multiply them, you get 1. And then the same thing is if it's A and B. So the same idea, reciprocal, the reciprocal of a non-zero number of the form AB is BA. So you just switch them. So I kind of answered this one with this one, but there, if you multiply these two together, you also get 1. Right? A over B times B over A is A times B over B times A. And because of the commutative property of multiplication, you can write that as AB. You don't really need to do that. It just all cancels and becomes 1. Okay. So the last problems we're doing is dividing fractions. What is the value of x divided by y when x is a fraction and y is a fraction? So here is the one time in algebra that I let you use the divide sign, right? X divided by y, or x over y, is the same as x divided by y. And so if my x is a fraction, negative 3/4, I let you write the divide sign. And then y is a fraction, negative 2 over 3. Okay, and hopefully you remember dividing fractions in middle school. One of the things you may have learned was keep, change, change. Basically that means keep this, change this, multiply, and then change this by switching it. So when you're dividing by a fraction, you can multiply by the reciprocal to get the same thing. So it makes it easier for you, so you don't have to divide, since we know how to multiply fractions. So let's just turn this into a multiplication problem. Let's keep the negative 3 over 4. Let's change the divide sign to a multiplication sign. And in algebra, we use a dot instead of an x, right? Because x is usually a variable. And then flip these. Put the 3 on top and then put the negative 2 on the bottom. Again, this is a negative times a negative number. So our answers are going to end up being positive. So it doesn't matter, but it makes it easier on yourself if you just always keep the negative on the top, and then when you flip it, you can move it to the bottom. You could also keep it to the top. It cancels anyway, but just flip it. Just leave it on top, and then when you flip it, move it to the bottom. So the top is going to be negative 3 times 3. The bottom is going to be 4 times negative 2. This becomes negative 9 over negative 8. My negatives cancel. Negative divided by a negative is a positive, so this just becomes 9 over 8. Okay, so then try this one on your own, press pause, and then check back for the solution, and then we'll be done. Okay, so hopefully you got negative 3 over 10. or 3 over negative 10, either one is fine. Remember, it doesn't matter if it's on the top or the bottom. And you can see here we have a positive number divided by a negative number, so our answer is going to be negative. That makes sense. We're going to keep the first fraction. We're going to change the divide to a multiply, and then we're going to change the other fraction by flipping it. I made this a negative 5, so then I moved that negative 5 to the bottom. Then I multiplied across 3 times 2 and 4 times negative 5. But here, because we want to simplify it, we have to reduce fractions. Because we already had it split out, rather than writing this as 6 over negative 20 and then dividing, which you can do that, that's fine. You notice they both have a 2, but here I noticed it before while it was still split out. So I canceled a 2 with one of the 2's in the 4, and I was left with a 2 down there, and that made it easier. Okay, that's it. Enjoy.